Please do. Go to Jamie now. We can start.
Okay. You can hear me?
Yep.
Good, good. Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody to the launch of UHoo Aura. It's been called by me specifically as the Super-uHoo because I really do think it's the most amazing product. My name is Graham Mills, the Managing Director of Airprofiling Ltd, UK distributor for UHoo's AIQ monitors, or AIQ monitors. And I'd like to welcome you, our invitees, from as far afield as Italy, France, Luxembourg, Holland, Romania, Republic of Ireland, Spain, United States, Singapore, and even the Republic of Korea. Thank you for joining us today. I've been fortunate to have been working with the UHoo team for over 3 years now, and in particular with Dustin Olhansen, who is with us today, and his CTO, Brian Ling, two incredible guys who have worked this business from zero to where it is now in a very short space of time. And the work that they do in producing UHoo Aura has taken place over several months, beg your pardon. And the big thing about this, Aura, is that it's a brilliant combined IAQ and IEQ monitor, UHoo Aura. Our distinguished guest speakers and panelists do not do so in the capacity of product endorsement, but as experts in their own particular field and in the non-domestic sector as well. You'll hear more about them shortly from our guest moderator, Jamie Hailstone, who is the group editor of Air Quality News, which I think you will agree is the UK's voice for air quality, the air quality industry. But before I hand over to Jamie, I'd like to draw your attention to Bill Gates' speech. This is in the context of the pandemics today. Bill Gates gave speeches at the Munich Security Conference of February 2017 and has done so in several years since. At all these events, he gave a loud and clear warning to world leaders that history shows that a pandemic of some description is inevitable and that the world is not prepared for it. How true is that? He gave a chilly emphasis that a pandemic could kill 30 million people, i.e. more people than in a couple of nuclear strikes. Witness the Spanish flu in pandemic in 1918, which reputedly killed in excess of 50 million people. In March of last year, March 2020, a group of researchers at the Australian National University predicted a best case scenario, that's a best case scenario, of 15 million deaths, and the worst case scenario of 68 million deaths. As of yesterday, WHO's dashboard, World Health Organization dashboard, indicated a cumulative of 111 million cases and 2.5 million deaths worldwide. And of course, this won't necessarily take into account those countries who are not able to audit properly these sort of figures. As the saying goes, every cloud has a silver lining, and it's taken this pandemic to really throw the focus onto indoor air quality, and not just in the context of the biological aspect, but also in the aspect of all the other pollutants that exist that we have to live with. And I hand over, please, to Jamie Hailstone, our guest moderator. Jamie.
Thank you, Graham. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this online event. Hopefully, we're going to have a sort of fascinating couple of hours talking about this issue. The subject of air quality never seems to be sort of far away from the new. Often, you could say, I probably would say that as a journalist and as the group editor of Air Quality News, but I think it's genuinely true. It is one of the sort of big issues of the day. Now, often when we talk about air quality, we often talk about the outdoors. We all see the sort of the news coverage and the pictures of roads with lots of cars going past and lots of exhaust pipes. So often we don't necessarily think about indoor air quality. Often there's that perception that when you're indoors, actually the air quality that you're breathing is fine. You know, you seem to be breathing some different sort of type of air. So often indoor air quality as a subject gets overlooked. And hopefully what we can do today through these presentations and this discussion is have a look at a subject which doesn't often get sort of talked about and sort of look at it sort of from anew. Now, obviously, we're chatting the day after the roadmap was announced. Businesses will now be looking to try and get back to some sort of normality. I think for an awful lot of companies, the big issue will be sort of looking at their facilities and their offices and looking at how they can bring workers back in. I think there's no doubt that a lot of workers will need a little bit of reassurance as they go sort of going forward. And it will be up to companies and facilities managers to sort of help, you know, prove that, you know, to give some reassurance. And actually air quality, the air quality inside your building is going to be a key issue. A lot of workers out there are going to be looking for reassurance that, you know, it is being monitored, it is being dealt with, and there are systems in place to help bring people in. There's also the wider health aspects. We all know that if somebody is in a good environment, if they're breathing in good quality air, they tend to be more productive, happier, healthier, all those sort of things. And there are various sort of things in place that we can look at through that. And actually, I think indoor air quality is going to be sort of quite key going forward. And also companies are going to need systems in place to help monitor that. Now, we're all used when we walk in an office building or an office block to seeing a thermostat on the wall with the temperature very proudly sort of, you know, sort of posted. I think going forward, it will be interesting to see whether or not workers will also expect to see a little box saying your air quality is good. You know, today is, you know, a good day for that. We all understand the importance of a thermostat because if it's too cold, people have to, you know, wrap up or don't want to work there. So yes, it'd be interesting to see going forward and getting people's opinions on whether you think that air quality is going to be one of those things that new workers, you know, will look out for. And often, it's often said as well that certainly for office buildings, if there is poor air quality, is it systematic of another problem? Is there an issue with the heating system? You know, is your air conditioning actually working properly? And air quality monitoring can help sort of pinpoint sort of larger issues that may be at work. And they can also help sort of make your building more efficient and maybe sort of help save on energy costs because you can pinpoint these problems and maybe use less energy. So there is also a business case as well for air quality. Now, I've talked quite a lot and I can only apologise for that in advance. But we have got a sort of excellent panel of speakers. What I'm going to do now is just run through them so you know sort of what's coming. At all points, you'll be able to sort of put questions in the little chat section. And we will have a sort of full Q&A session afterwards as well. If you have to hand the email, which has your login, you should also have an email address there, which will also allow you to send in questions as well. So do feel free to do that. It's good to make this as interactive as possible. Otherwise, it's just me talking and nobody really wants that. Now, first up, the first speaker that we're going to have is going to be Kavita Kumari, who is a sustainability and health and wellbeing principal at Cundall. She's a mechanical engineer who became a sustainable design consultant in 2007. Very highly qualified. She's a building engineer and a sustainable buildings expert, as well as being a licensed assessor and an accredited professional. She's going to be talking on the offices of the future and the importance of setting standards, which should give us sort of plenty to think about. Following up from that, we have Francesca Brady, who'll be talking afterwards. She's going to be talking on the correlation between health, wellness, and productivity, which also should be very sort of interesting. Francesca is the chief exec of AirRated and also has an MSc in environmental science and focuses specifically on indoor air quality. So I'm sure she's got plenty to say on the subject. Now, we also have a number of guests who are also going to be sort of coming in, chipping in and giving their viewpoints and their hot takes, for want of a better phrase, on all the sort of issues raised. We have Michael Grant, who's Chief Operating Officer of Metrikus. He is an operations strategy management professional with extensive experience in designing, implementing, and managing lean systems. So should be sort of able to bring in some perspective from that. We also have Paul Bingham, who is Chief Executive of Smart Connected Buildings. And we also, of course, have Graham Mills, who we've just seen as well, who will also be talking. And we also have a presentation from Dustin Onwardson, who is the Chief Exec of UHoo Limited. So hopefully that should give us all plenty to talk about. Like I said, if you hear anything or you have any questions during this event and you want to sort of put them down, do stick them down in the little Q&A section or the chat section, and we will try and get to them as we're ready. But what I will now do is hand over to Kavita, who is our first speaker of the afternoon. And she's going to be talking, as I said, on offices of the future. So over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Jamie. So good afternoon, everyone. So this afternoon, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the roles of standards, focusing in terms of air quality and what we would expect when we go back into the workplace. So I think all of you can agree with me. The coronavirus pandemic, it's been a global pandemic. It's changed our lives in so many ways. Our normal lives have, been uprooted. We've moved from going to work every day. We now work from home, and in a few days' time, as our Prime Minister mentioned yesterday, we should be going back to some level of normality. I'm not sure about that, but we will be venturing back into the workspace. And in terms of, the space we're going back into, what can we expect from it? So as part of this whole initiative in the past few months, we've been undertaking staff return to work surveys. And what we found is that at least 80% of staff want to know that it is a safe space they're going back to. They want to know what the conditions of the space would be. And one way of doing that is to understand the indoor environmental quality of the space, or the indoor air quality within the space itself, and what are the essential alterations which are going to make the COVID areas safer. I think what we're also finding is what we found from the surveys as well is that not all staff want to go back to a 5-day week. I think most are looking to have that agility to go in a few days a week and maintain a better health and life balance. And where I'm going to focus on today is to sort of touch on certain things that can be considered as part of the back to office route map, how it focuses mostly on air quality, what sustainability or green rating or health and wellbeing rating tools which can be considered, and how early engagement is important to start to look at this from now going forward, if you haven't already. I think just to give you some background, pre-pandemic in terms of productivity, which Francesca will talk more about afterwards, 131 million lost sick days in a workspace is quite a lot of lost sick days, but what's post-pandemic going to look like? Also the ongoing issues with contaminated outdoor air and bad quality, how is that baseline mitigated before it enters into the building? So again, going into what Graham mentioned earlier, the chilling data from WHO, is COVID here to stay, and how we're going to minimize that risk within a workspace itself. So how do we create a safer workspace? So here are a number of industry available marketplace standards, certification tools in simple terms. And most of these focus on holistic sustainability and well-being. But when it comes to addressing indoor air quality and environmental quality issues, well reset and AirRated provide sensible guidance and credible criteria for application in a workplace, and can be used as a guide-based guidance in terms of creating a strategy to going back into the workplace. I'm not going to go into great detail about every item, every part of the criteria, but in summary, in a nutshell, from an air quality context, air is very much is the main focus of all these standards. And I think the key items there to be to understand is that air quality testing is very important. So understanding what's in the space and how that will define measures which will be applied to the space is very important. Again, we talk about material selection. So you're creating a clean space. What you don't want is to have materials or products or finishes which are off-gassing to contaminate the space. Choice of ventilation and filtration. Going back into your workplace, I think some level of due diligence on the ventilation system and the filtration system is key to understand how much of the external bad air is coming into the space, or if any of the air is being recirculated, how that's been managed, and to ensure that clean air is introduced into the occupied spaces. Moisture control, again, is relative humidity, understanding, getting that balance right. We all know that COVID is an airborne disease, so understanding how relative humidity impacts this has a key sort of suggestion on how we mitigate our spaces. Maintenance and operations is, again, understanding how your building works and optimizing the strategies there. Construction processes, if you're going into a new building, how the building's built. There's I've got a story which, if I got some time, I would tell afterwards. In terms of a leaky building, if it's not airtight, how much of that air is bad air is introduced into the spaces. And most importantly is IEQ monitoring. So that sort of touches on on reset. Reset's another standard which focuses purely on continuous monitoring and communication of that standard. And what you do with that data is very, very important. I think I've put AirRated here as well as another standard, but Francesca will go through that in a moment. One of the other key things I want to touch on is in terms of what targets you should be looking into for your spaces. So this is from Reset. This is a summary from Reset's target performance standards and the choice of sensors which you need to consider. I think you're looking at sort of grade A, grade B sensors, which are allow for calibration. So calibration is really important because you want to ensure that the sensors are working properly and to the manufacturer's recommended standards. Other things you need to consider as well is the sensor output resolution, data output intervals, accuracy, measuring range, and again, how often you need to recalibrate it in performance checks. So here is standard industry practice. So these standards are based on industry best practice and international standards. The high performance standards in here is, if you have a space or occupant or a developer or employer who's looking to go that one step further and create a better space, I can tell you now that, again, standards are going to get more stringent, especially air quality standards, because that gives people the assurance that, the space is being maintained well. And most importantly, there are a lot of sensors in the marketplace, making sure that you've got good quality standards is incredibly important, and also understanding how you decipher that data and what you use that data which is outputted and what you do with it to mitigate a space if necessary. And my last slide, in terms of key things you need to be thinking about, certification and standards are a great starting point. They give you the right level of guidance, which you can use to develop your space or strategy for a space you're going to be managing or moving into. Again, operation of a space is important. It's more important than the design element of it. So be mindful of that performance. Having audits more frequently will give give you that comfort to know that things are going as you had designed it to be. We talked about materials and cleaning products. I touched on it earlier, but these are key to maintaining a cleaner space. So you can design for cleanliness and safe spaces with right level of fresh air and quality. But if you have materials or cleaning products which are off-gassing, that will have a detrimental impact on that space. I touched on meeting design standards. Does not mean meeting performance in use. That's about continuous monitoring. Be conscious of energy use. Again, there's a lot of statements on the internet saying that you need to introduce quite a lot of fresh air into spaces, workspaces going forward. Be conscious of the energy use. Fresh air only required during pandemic conditions, purging or critical conditions. That would reduce the energy usage in a building and consumption. You can never have too many plants. Plants, you need quite a lot to make a positive impact on the space, but having the right level of plants is a good start. Again, I think the last three are fairly something I touched earlier. Again, you don't know what's happening in the space unless you monitor and test it. Again, continuous monitoring is basically one. Again, in terms of level of data, quality and quantitative data is equally important. Again, understanding what you do with that data and what output you're getting is also incredibly important. To close off with the pandemic, I mentioned earlier, air quality standards, indoor and outdoors, are going to become more stringent. The rating tools are going to become more onerous. So the points that I've highlighted will be a good start in terms of going forward with the next steps. And thank you very much. And I pass you over to Francesca.
Oh, actually, no, it's...
I'm
Hi,
trying
everybody.
to stop.
Unfortunately, I'm not Francesca.
Sorry, Jamie. Yeah.
It's okay. I've been mistaken for many things. Before anybody else, yes, Jamie Hailstone is my real name as well, because I do often get asked. Thanks, Kavita. That was a really interesting sort of talk. You mentioned obviously there are a lot of standards that people sort of have to sort of look at, and that they are likely to get more stringent in the future. Have you any sort of sense in what sort of areas they may sort of get more stringent, what areas they may sort of tighten?
I think air quality is a key one, because air quality has been around for a while now. A lot of focus has been given to outdoor air quality, very little in terms of indoor air quality. But I think more and more with the pandemic, people are going to be, or occupants are going to be more aware of their spaces, and considering that air quality, COVID is an airborne disease, maintaining what's happening in the space, that's going to dictate air quality standards even more going forward.
Now, you mentioned you can never have enough plants, and we can see obviously by the backdrop that you've got that you're a big fan of sort of plants. Can you sort of explain sort of roughly what are the benefits of having plants in offices?
I think the two key benefits there, I think one is bringing nature internally from a psychological perspective, that, the same way you go, let me explain this better. Like you go to the park in summer and you find that calmness set, in nature with grass. And I think it's just bringing that little bit of softness into the workspace as well. And I think this is key, because as we work from home now, where we've got a lot of control within our spaces, we also, I've got plants in my flat, and I know a lot of people who've started bringing plants and just to soften that space. And I think that's one part of it, bringing nature indoors. The second part of it, again, is it does clean the air, but you need quite a lot of plants. I think last time I read a researcher in the US did mention that I think you need 10 appropriate plants per person to make that level of impact. So I don't think there's enough space in a room to do that somehow. But those are two items I can think of at the minute. Thank you.
That's fair enough. I know, sort of chatting, I seem to remember that in some, like in hospitals, they have to sort of remove plants overnight, because they found that some cases it can impact air quality overnight, obviously.
Yeah. So again, it's choosing the right plants. Yeah.
Yeah. What sort of plants do people need to choose then?
I think mother-in-law's tongue is known to give out oxygen at night. So that's the only one I know at the minute. But the rest, I think there's a lot of research, and I think yeah, maybe Francesca have better ideas. I don't know. Yeah.
There was that really, famous NASA study that put peace lily at the top.
Peace lily, yeah.
And on your title page, there was the moss, which is also really good for regulating humidity. So I think there are lots of positives, although they have their limitations, plants, but I think there are many positives throughout a wide range of things, aspects such as health and well-being that make them a great thing to include in a workspace.
Yeah.
Just looking at the questions that have been raised, Adrian has asked, you mentioned validation in your speech. How can validation be achieved on the lower cost sensors, especially contraindicating issues?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I couldn't comment on the sensors, but again, there is guidance in terms of the choice of sensors which need to be considered. I think on one of my slides, I looked at grade A and grade B sensors. There's a wide range in terms of pricing as well and quality of sensors in the marketplace. But I think going for something which is grade A or grade B or something which is reset accredited is a good start. And also recalibrating, having some agreement with the manufacturers to make sure it's recalibrated, that will give some quality of results there. In terms of cost elements, I think it's something which needs to be picked up with the manufacturers themselves or suppliers.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. And just one last sort of question, Colombo style.
Francesca. Because there's there's quite a fair amount of academic research coming out at the moment for low cost sensors, because I think lots of them have been popping up, particularly in the last sort of 18 months. There are those more well-established names that have been around for a while, but a lot popping up, and I think people are just really confused about what they should be buying. So us relying on academic research is a good place to start, and having that third-party verification of sensors is ideal, because there is no independent body at the moment, or there was no one at the beginning doing this sort of thing. So Reset doing their validation of sensors, but also academics doing their own studies and evaluation of sensors is really key for sensors.
Yeah, I think the sensor qualities are also getting better with time as more and more people are becoming aware. Yeah.
Kavita, you also sort of mentioned the importance of, sort of doing audits of buildings. I mean, sort of how regularly do you think companies or sort of facilities managers or people should be sort of auditing their buildings?
I think if you've got indoor air quality monitoring strategy in place where, you know, the sensors are giving out real-time data or information, then that's an ongoing sort of, that's a good step forward. But in terms of doing a sort of a third-party audit, if you're looking at Reset, you know, if you certify against Reset or Well, Reset recommends annual audits and performance audits, and Well recommends 3 yearly audits. So this is to maintain certification. But I think between 6 months and a year is a good start. Or, you know, I think checking into the data through the indoor monitoring strategy which you have in place, or systems you have in place, that will give an indication if there's anything out of range. You need to check on it and see what the issues are and what mitigation measures you can put in, you know, put back in place.
Okay, well, that's brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure everybody found this very helpful. Well, we got another question. How would you audit? Would you need a standard to work to, and reference monitoring systems?
Again, you can create your own audit if you know the subject matter. Speak to someone professional who understands or is a subject matter expert, or you can follow a standard, and within the standard or rating tools themselves, the organizations or which run the standards, they'll be able to put you in touch with the right people to do these audits for you.
Okay, well, that's brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Kavita. I'm sure
no problem.
I think, could I just interject there, Jamie, just to say that I think people sometimes feel that a single one-off snapshot audit is enough to tell people whether the air quality is good or not. Well, it may well be at that particular moment, but that is only a snapshot. And therefore, as Kavita was saying, the continual and continuous monitoring provides you with a good breadth of information. And that is so important. I personally don't think that an air quality audit should be ever be less than 2 months. And that's, even then you could argue that that is not long enough because it doesn't take into account seasonal factors, etc. But the big rule, in my view, is to simply avoid snapshot audits and taking decisions on those snapshot audits.
Yeah.
Those are quite dangerous in terms of being misleading information. Anyway, handing it back to you, Jamie, and we want to listen to Francesca.
Yes, thanks for that, Graham. So I'll now hand over to Francesca, who's the Chief Exec of AirRated, who is going to be talking on the correlation between health, wellness and productivity. So over to you, Francesca.
Thank you, Jamie. Let me share my screen. I presume everyone can see my screen. So speaking of product endorsement, this is not an example of that, although it is spectacular product placement for someone. Long story short, I was struggling to find a picture of air yesterday, as you do. It's not visible until there's some sort of horrible pollution event, or actually yesterday, particularly in London, we had an orangey hue outside as the Saharan dust storm passed through. But yeah, air is not visible unless there's some sort of pollution event, or until there's a means to measure, monitor, and then visualize air, which is apt and leads me on nicely to my presentation. Air quality as a subject has become more visible itself as a highly topical area in mainstream media over the past decade or so. Outdoor air quality, as I think Kavita touched on, has kind of stolen the headlines for the most part. However, indoor air quality has gained a substantial uplift in interest and attention since the start of the pandemic, really, raising awareness and education on the topic. With this increasingly accessible knowledge on indoor air quality, together with the fact that we are inquisitive creatures who also happen to quite like control, it's no wonder personalized air quality solutions are attractive. So the likes of breezometer and personal wearables. These two character traits, or perhaps broader human traits of liking control and being inquisitive, have driven the demand for the democratization of data. So the ability to harness information about your own environments, making your own invisible visible, and even being able to base decisions off this data is extremely powerful. The reason we want to gain knowledge and take control of our environments is because we, particularly now, understand, at least at a high level, the impact of poor air quality on our health. So we spend 90% of our time indoors. For anyone who's been on an indoor air quality webinar before, I'm sure you've heard that a number of times. Probably not as many as you've heard the word unprecedented over the last 12 months. But it's true, we spend vast amounts of our time indoors, both living and working. It has taken a pandemic, as we discussed earlier, for most of the population to become aware of their indoor environments and the benefits of actively designing and maintaining healthy indoor spaces. But it's an awareness that is definitely here to stay. So pre-pandemic, I think the healthy buildings movement and the ability to measure and monitor indoor air quality was sort of seen as a nice to have. Then there was a gradual shift towards the more compelling competitive advantage, because you had studies coming out like that from Harvard and Syracuse universities, which showed a quantitative financial impact to good, healthy indoor spaces with good air quality. And now it's almost a must-have because of the pandemic, which is reflected in things like, well, UK-wise, the Future Buildings Standard, which is calling for enhanced ventilation. And Part F in the UK building regulations is out for consultation at the moment. And that proposes indoor air quality monitoring as part of that strategy. So moving on, there are loads of variables to cover with indoor air quality or indoor environmental quality, but I'll just focus on 5, otherwise we will be here for hours. Let's start with particulate matter. So I've highlighted PM 2.5 here because it's probably the one that people are most familiar with, but PM comes in lots of different sizes. So you've got ultrafine, you've got PM1, PM4, PM 2.5, PM10, lots of them. PM 2.5 can get deep into the lungs, and ultrafine particles are so small that they can even penetrate into the bloodstream. So the impact of this in the short term is that it aggravates conditions like asthma. They can be massively aggravated by exposure to elevated levels of particulate matter. Exposure to elevated levels for a prolonged period of time can cause long-term chronic respiratory and also cardiovascular damage. More recently, particulate matter has been thrown into the spotlight for 2 key reasons. The first being that exposure to high levels over that prolonged period of time leads to a decline in lung function. So if someone was to be exposed to these high levels and then contract COVID, health outcomes are poorer, recovery rates are slower. The second important factor with PM 2.5 in the current climate are the studies, the first of which I believe was an Italian study that showed how the virus might piggyback on these particles and travel much further than the first in state rule around the 2 meters, which is a real problem in indoor environments. Outdoor, there's a much larger capacity for these things to be diluted. Indoors, we're in a much more confined space. So that's the health impact. Productivity, on the other hand. So research has been provided to show empirical evidence of a direct effect of air pollution on efficient operation on the New York Stock Exchange. So it actually links short-term variations in PM 2.5 in this particular study to movements in the S&P 500. So in this study, it's quoted that the effects were substantial. 1 standard deviation increase in ambient PM 2.5 reduced the same day returns by 11.9%. So I think that's a pretty powerful message when you're looking at the financial impact. It's one thing for workers in normal office environments to be impacted. It's another thing when you're in this kind of critical environment making snap decisions. So moving on, carbon dioxide. So this is another pollutant, and apologies to those who don't recognize CO2 as a pollutant. It's another parameter which impacts performance. And yes, I've got a pint of beer up here. It's a nice, relatable, meaningful stat that when the concentration of carbon dioxide indoors reaches 1,000 parts per million, cognitive function is seen to decrease almost the same amount as after 2 pints of beer. So back in 2017, Lloyd's of London issued a daytime drinking ban because a couple of employees would go out at lunchtime, have a pint or 2 of beer, come back and make some pretty poor decisions. So it really is about time that we take the impact of poor indoor air quality with the same seriousness that we would apply to situations like that. This glorious diagram is actually in the published research conducted by Fisk and Satish et al. So it's titled, "Is CO2 an indoor pollutant?" and looks at low, moderate, and slightly elevated levels of PM 2.5, carbon dioxide, and the impact on human decision-making performance. So as you can see from all these dots, and perhaps I'll get Graham to send a link round with all of these visuals in afterwards so you can look at it properly, there's quite a dramatic impact on at least 7 of these human decision-making performance parameters, with large and statistically large reductions occurring in 7 of the decision-making performances. So basic function, initiative, information usage being just a few of those. So real-time CO2 monitoring is great for identifying areas of perhaps an office that have high CO2 concentrations that aren't conducive to a productive environment. But also real-time CO2 monitoring is being used more recently to identify risk areas for COVID transmission. So it's quite good at identifying poorly ventilated areas or areas where there are lots of people, because CO2 is driven by occupant density and ventilation effectiveness. So quite a nice tool to use real-time monitoring of indoor air quality as risk mitigation in the current climate. So CO2 and TVOCs are commonly used for proxies for ventilation effectiveness. CO2 has little impact on human health, whereas VOCs can be irritants for eyes, airways, skin. At their worst, they can be carcinogens, but there are those that are fairly harmless, like the ones that are emitted from food products. And then you get others which are more sinister. So on the whole, levels of VOCs indoors are driven by sources such as new materials or furniture or finishes, or activities like cooking and cleaning. And I think cleaning is one that Kavita definitely touched on. So I thought this was quite a nice graph, so you could actually see the difference between the levels of TVOCs emitted from different types of cleaning products. So one is the eco-friendly green product. The other one is a fairly potent, widely used product. Just as effective. The eco ones are just as effective, but they've got, they're environmentally friendly and they don't compromise indoor air quality, which is a massive benefit. Temperature and humidity play a role in the rate of emission and off-gassing of VOCs from products and materials indoors. Temperature is also important to monitor from a health, comfort, and productivity viewpoint. Health can be impacted by indoor environments that are consistently too hot or too cold or wildly fluctuating in temperature. That can sometimes contribute to a phenomenon called sick building syndrome, which most of you are probably familiar with. Men and women experience temperature in very different ways. Women tend to like environments that are slightly warmer. Men prefer those which are slightly cooler. It helps that men are walking space heaters so they can heat themselves up, whereas women need a little bit of help. And then finally, touching on productivity, the role of temperature on performance is complex, but the rule of thumb states that, and you can see in this graph, that for every 1 degree above 25 degrees Celsius, you lose roughly 2% in productivity, with 21 to 22 degrees Celsius being optimal. And finally, we'll take a look at humidity, which is honestly the underrated hero of a healthy building. Humidity tends to be overlooked. So indoor air quality might be overlooked as a whole subject area, but humidity inside that subject area, I feel at least, is overlooked, or perhaps just not given the attention I believe it deserves, and it is absolutely crucial for health. So dry indoor environments promote survival rate of viruses, and the micro droplets shrunk by evaporation become lighter so they can stay airborne for longer and travel farther. And this is an optimal route for viruses to be inhaled by other building occupants. Dry air also dries out our mucous membranes, which is pretty grim, but the mucous membranes in our noses, which dry out and then become more permeable to viruses, so easier to pick up, more susceptible. So these facts are true for COVID, but also other viruses like the common cold and flu. So this is quite a nice infographic, courtesy of Dr. Stephanie Taylor, which basically states that maintaining relative humidity between 40 and 60% is optimal, not only to prevent the spread of viruses, but also to promote our body's natural defenses to these viruses. In winter in the Northern Hemisphere, so particularly recently, it's difficult to maintain optimal humidity between 40 and 60, which is why the implementation of a monitoring system for indoor environmental quality in conjunction with something like a humidification system is key, because humidification systems are notoriously quite power hungry. So if you're able to monitor the indoor environment, monitor humidity, and then only use humidification systems on demand, this is quite a nice way to reduce energy consumption and not compromise sustainability at the expense of maintaining a healthy space. So the healthy buildings movement is something that's been propelled to the fore, particularly in the last 12, 18 months, but it is definitely here to stay. Absolutely the best place to start is to figure out what you're working with. So monitoring and assessing the current state of play, then making adjustments, monitoring those adjustments, and then making data-driven and data-validated decisions based on that. And that's all from me. So I'll hand back to Jamie now.
Thanks very much, Francesca. That was brilliant. I was wondering if we could just go back. I hate to bring in the dreaded COVID word, if that's okay. But you mentioned obviously the impact of cleaning products, the use of cleaning products can have in an office environment. Now, obviously, looking forward to the next few months, a lot of people will be thinking about reopening offices and invariably increasing the use of cleaning products to make sure that our offices are safe. Is that likely to have a further impact on sort of air quality and the environment of an office?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think everyone's knee-jerk reaction has been, we have to sterilize everything, we have to clean all our surfaces, and it must be with things where I can smell that it's doing its job. Because I mean, the government guidance and the scientific guidance by SAGE has always been soap and water is effective. So soap and water, washing our hands in soap and water will kill COVID. So it's one of those things where I feel like we use potent cleaning chemicals because we can smell that it's doing something almost, and we kind of don't have faith in something that we can't smell because it doesn't smell like it's killing anything. So I think there is definitely the awkward knee-jerk reaction where we will just bleach everything and blitz everything, and it will massively compromise indoor air quality. But I think as this education and awareness grows, it's already growing around ventilation in particular, but ventilation, indoor air quality, I think all this stuff will start to filter through. So perhaps in the immediate term, there will be that awkward teething period where we're doing things that are compromising other aspects of our health. But eventually it will filter through, the information will filter through, and we'll start to make smarter decisions with regards to that.
And how do you think sort of ventilation systems can sort of be used or utilised best to sort of help reduce transmission or the risk of transmission in offices?
So I know that the guidance has been, if you can, switch to 100% outdoor air supply, which is fine, but in the long term, people will want to switch back to perhaps 80, 90% recirculated air even. In which case, enhanced ventilation is one way to dilute pollutants, whether they're viruses or CO2 or TVOCs inside. But also clean air technology is really effective, and in some cases doesn't require you to push more outdoor air in. But it's another way to dilute the pollutants and the viruses inside without having to ramp up energy consumption by pumping up ventilation rates.
Now, obviously, you talked very sort of early on about the various different types of particulates that exist. Certainly at Air Quality News, I write PM 2.5 every other minute in an article. Is there sort of any sort of way of sort of saying, is there sort of like a healthy 2.5 range for the inside of a building? Is there some sort of, sort of baseline that's good and perhaps more risky and, so forth? Yeah,
so the World Health Organization states that there is, and I quote, no safe level of PM 2.5, which doesn't really help anyone because there's bound to be some, so we need to keep it as low as possible. Indoor environments tend to be better than outdoors because just physical barriers, so walls, doors, will buffer a lot of particulates from outside. Naturally ventilated spaces are just inherently worse than mechanically ventilated spaces because in a mechanically ventilated space, you've got filters on the ventilation units. and their primary function is to filter out things like PM. So I've lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Dust levels. Dust levels. Healthy dust levels.
Healthy dust levels. No safe levels. So we need to keep it as low as possible. So I think even in naturally ventilated spaces, but also in mechanically ventilated spaces, employing localized filtration is also good. So portable air purification units with HEPA filters in, because there is no safe level. There are adverse effects as soon as you hit 1 microgram per cubic meter. So the World Health Organization have set a guideline of 10 micrograms per cubic meter. The WELL standard suggests that anything below 15 micrograms per cubic meter is healthy. So it tends to be around like the 10, 15 mark that people are going with at the moment. I think Fitwell suggests 12 micrograms.
Yeah. Reset's also 12, yeah.
Yeah, anything 15 and below tends to be okay. Graham?
Yeah.
Jamie, I think people are looking forward to listening to the next part of the presentations. And I think we ought to defer this load of questions that are coming in to address them after we've heard from Dustin. Would you be happy with that?
Yeah, no, that's fine. We can do that. Absolutely.
Okay. Dustin?
No audio, Dustin. We don't know if you're speaking or not.
Okay. No visual, no audio.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Not really.
Can you hear me?
It's very soft.
Yeah.
Is this better now?
That's
Yes.
better.
All right. Yeah, sorry, some technical issues earlier on. Sorry, what was the question again?
We're wanting you, Dustin, if you would go ahead with the presentation regarding UHoo Aura.
Okay, all right. So we'll do the presentation first ahead of the panel. All right.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, sure, that works well. Let me share my screen. I'll first run the video before doing the presentation. All right.
Poor indoor air impacts the health and safety of your employee. Is continuously exposed to various pollutants in the air are more likely to get sick, perform poorly, and miss work. Research has shown that poor indoor air costs companies at least $1,000 per employee per year due to productivity loss. There has never been an easy way to deal with pollutants in the air until now. UHoo Aura continuously monitors all the important things in the air, so you know exactly what to do to improve it and also to reduce coronavirus risk. View real-time data of all your offices and manage them from one dashboard. Get alerts if safety limits are exceeded so you can immediately take action. You'll get tips on what actions to take to reduce risk and ensure the health and safety of your employees 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. UHoo, take control, ensure safety, improve productivity.
All right. Yeah, so that was our product launch video. And now I'll be jumping into a quick presentation on the UHoo Aura and its capabilities. All right. Okay. Yeah, so our company is called UHoo, and we position ourselves as your first step to clean air. And before I jump into the product, I just wanted to share a quick story about how we started the company. So I met Brian back in Hong Kong last 2013, where we met during our MBA program. And at that time, Brian is suffering from asthma and I have allergic rhinitis. And when we were inside the school buildings, we often had our allergy attacks. And while we were there, we were trying to inform the school about the issues. We also saw students getting the same problems as well. And we realized that the school wasn't really doing anything about it because they didn't know that the problem existed. And so this is where the whole idea of you can only manage what you measure came about. And that's when Brian and I decided 1 year into the program to drop our classes and start the company. So we started the company in 2014, took 3 years of R&D to launch our very first product. And fast forward to today, we're launching UHoo Aura. This is now the product that is focused on the commercial and industrial market. So UHoo Aura, we're positioning it as the best-in-class commercial environment monitor. It measures 13 environmental parameters, ranging from temperature, humidity, CO2, the more usual ones, to ultrafine dust particles to formaldehyde, and even looking at the whole environment by including light and sound. So these are the environmental parameters that we measure. And the way we design the product is these are the base parameters, and we allow you to upgrade to add an additional parameter of your choice, depending on which industry you belong in, or which one is more useful for you based on the use cases you want to build. And these include sulfur dioxide, ammonia, oxygen, hydrogen sulfide, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone. So the way it's designed is it's going to be on a modular basis wherein you can just attach this new sensor into the device. And instead of having 13, you would have 14. And up to 15 if you choose nitrogen dioxide and ozone, because those two can fit into the device. And after listening to our clients over the last 2 to 3 years when they started using our existing home product, we understood that they wanted different ways of deploying the product, not just on the table. So we also made it easier to deploy, where we allow customers to screw it to the wall or double tape it on the wall, or if they still prefer to keep it on the table, they can still keep it on the table. And we also understand that some of the customers in the enterprise market do not like it when we try to connect to their Wi-Fi network. So we would like to provide them with some alternatives. So the way we view this is we want to make it easier for customers to connect. If they're okay with connecting to the Wi-Fi network, we would be employing enterprise security technology, which is 802.1x, which means that you can insert certificates into our product so that it can connect to your network much more easily. And if you don't want the product to connect to your network, you can just slot in a SIM card to every unit, and you can just run it anywhere inside the building or inside any space. So this is NB-IoT technology. It can also use 4G and 5G SIM cards. And another connectivity option would be Ethernet. This one would be a wired connection. This one would require the customer to pull wires if they prefer, but this is not really, but a lot of the buildings today, I'm not sure in the UK, but in Asia, they already have Ethernet cables running all across the building. So it's very easy to deploy. And for more traditional buildings, we also allow Modbus. This is going to be as a connector to the Ethernet port on the product. And when we look at power options, we would also be providing two main power supplies and a backup battery. So the power supply would be through micro USB, you just plug it into the wall, and PoE. If you decide to use Ethernet as your data source to connect to the network, you can also use it for power at the same time. And if in case there's a power fluctuation or power goes out, there would be a backup battery inside the device, and that would automatically kick in. And once power comes back on, it would automatically go back to the main power and the battery would recharge. And since we have multiple new parameters into the product, especially on the dust particles, we will also be enhancing our UHoo virus index. This was launched as a response to the pandemic last year, and it's being used currently in the home product. But with additional parameters that we're measuring, we would be able to enhance this virus index as well. And of course, with the hardware, we're also upgrading our entire software. And the way we view it is you would be able to understand everything in your atmosphere, in your environment. You would be able to have access to real-time data. You can look at all the historical data. You can create trends and charts to understand how your actions have improved the space and whether the actions were effective or not. So you can take remediation immediately. You would also be able to get alerts, not only through mobile push notifications, but you would also get it through email, and eventually we would also allow SMS alerts. And since you would be having more analytics, more data, we would be able to create more precise tips and recommendations to the customer so that they can improve their space much better.
Justin, we had a problem with listening to you. You were slightly muted, but
Okay.
now you come back now. Okay.
Okay. All right. And lastly, we also have integrations, and this would be via APIs, or if you want it to be wired, it can also be done through the Ethernet or the Modbus. And yeah, that's the quick presentation about UHoo Aura. And I'll also like to share with you a video on how this may apply if you do it for an entire building.
Justin, we're not hearing sound.
You're not hearing sound?
No.
Let me see how the settings. Okay, I'm not sure how to adjust the sound for this. Video settings. Share screen.
Justin, I can play the video.
Okay, all right. All right. Yeah, so that's how UHoo Aura is, and that's the new product that we launched. Over to you, Graham and Jamie.
Okay, I'd just like to ask you about the air quality index that you have as part of the part of the parameters in the new UHoo.
Sorry, Graham, I didn't catch what you mentioned.
You have an air quality index.
Yes.
In the UHoo Aura.
Yep.
What is that actually based on?
It's going to be a calculation based on the different parameters that we measure. So it will exclude air pressure, light, and noise. It's going to be a combination of the 10 other parameters.
And tell me, how is this designed? The air quality index. does it conform to any other indices, air quality indices that are well known around the world?
The different air quality indices around the world use different calculation methods. So we also created our own way and method to calculate the air quality index.
Jamie, over to you. You've got lots of questions there.
Yes, well, thank you, Dustin, for that presentation. That was very sort of helpful. I was wondering, obviously there are an awful lot of sort of air quality indexes sort of out there. Do you think sort of at some point, you know, there needs to be sort of an internationally agreed standard for these indexes, or these indices, sorry, I should say?
It really depends on how you want to approach it, because it also varies depending on what's important in a particular country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because an air quality index, you can use different parameters. You can choose which parameter you want to include in it. If, let's say, in the UK, it's much more important to measure PM 2.5, PM1, NO2, then those should be part of the air quality index. But if, let's say, if we look at it from another country, let's say, for example, in Singapore, what may be more important there would be CO2, VOCs, and PM 2.5, and the others would be less important. So we also need to understand the context on how people would value the air quality index, because eventually when we have the index, what we're addressing would still be the individual parameters.
So presumably, I'd be interested to get your take on this. In the last few years, have you seen sort of more and more sort of businesses taking air quality sort of more seriously? Is it sort of rising up the agenda?
Yes, it's actually rising up the agenda, especially with companies that have a focus on sustainability and health and well-being of their employees. They're usually the ones who are more receptive to utilizing air quality technology, measuring it, monitoring, and taking action on it. And with the pandemic, with COVID-19, it actually put it on top of a lot of companies' minds and a lot of people's minds. So it became easier to pitch because the pandemic pretty much educated the market on the importance of air quality.
And what do you think are sort of the biggest sort of misconceptions then that people often have about sort of air quality, and why do companies and businesses need to monitor air quality in their offices?
I guess one big misconception is people think air quality is just air quality, but not really understanding the individual components of it.
Mm-hmm.
A very common conversation we have with our clients and the companies that we speak with is that they would say they already have an air quality sensor, but when we dig deep, it actually just measures temperature, or at most temperature and carbon dioxide. But those are not the only factors that affect air quality. There's much more to it. So it's more of understanding what constitutes air quality, and these would be the different parameters that we need to be aware of.
Presumably, every building is different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to sort of look at each individual building and the certain issues for each one, rather than just, like I said, just putting one sensor in and thinking we're done.
Yes, that's correct. We can't really have something like a blanket solution. It's understanding the structure of the building, which area would be, where it would be best deployed in, how the building management system, how the AHUs are constructed. So it's also understanding all of these parts.
Kavita,
Graham?
Yeah, I was going to say, Kavita, could you make some comments on this at all? And anybody else who would like to comment on this, please do just raise your hand. Kavita, can you comment on this discussion?
Yeah, Dustin, could you just repeat what you just said? Sorry, I missed that.
We were sort of talking, it would be good actually just to bring in sort of Michael Grant as well, our other sort of speakers, and Paul as well, because they've been sort of listening to us talk for quite a while at this point. And just start just generally, amongst all the sort of panelists, how have you seen sort of indoor air quality sort of become more of an issue? Has it sort of risen up the agenda for you? Are you getting the feeling that sort of companies are taking this subject more seriously?
We are. So we are doing new indoor air quality projects every week. A lot of people want to monitor it continuously, like Graham said. We don't think, well, so there's two sides to it. One is something like AirRated that does something over 3 weeks, that does take into seasonality. It does take in what's going on in the building. It takes what's in the building, what's going on outside the building, construction work and things like that. But air changes throughout the year. So it's not like wired score. Wired score from a tech perspective, you measure the building to see how well it's connected from a technology point of view, and technology doesn't really change. People don't rip dark fiber out of buildings because it's not being used. When the infrastructure investment's gone in, it remains there. So it doesn't change. So your wired score from one year to the next is, if you got silver one year, you're more likely to get silver the next year as well, unless someone comes in and puts more connectivity into a building. Air is very different. Air changes, as everyone's mentioned on this, through the seasons, throughout the year. And if your BMS is not being maintained by either your internal facilities management team or your external facilities management team, your air quality will change over the year. And we've seen that a lot. And we see it more and more the more sensors we put in. Ongoing monitoring is a way to see what's going on. We actually just released last Friday as a business our own indoor air quality index, or we call it kiosk instead of an index like IEQ does, but it's a visual representation and people get to see that when they walk into a building. It's up on big screens and you can look at it all day long, and it's red, amber, green. But Dustin also said this earlier, because of COVID, everyone's become an indoor air quality expert overnight. No one knew what Francesca and Kavita knew and Dustin knew and Graham knew prior to this. Everyone just walked around happily, blindly breathing in whatever was out there. But indoor air quality is now huge. Sustainability, ESG, it's all about indoor air quality. We're speaking to some very large customers in the US, and all they want to talk about is air quality because, as you know, people mentioned earlier, young millennials, there's the conversation prior to us going live, Paul mentioned this, young millennials coming back to the office, they want to know, are they in a safe environment? What's going on with the air quality? So ongoing monitoring and having, one sensor per floor doesn't cut it. If you've got 10,000 square feet of floor, you need a few monitors, a few sensors per floor, but it is becoming more and more important, and it is here to stay. This is not a fad that will go away. It is here to stay. And the sensors that are out there now, as Kavita said earlier, there's lots of crap in the market. Pardon my language. I would normally swear, but I'm trying to refrain because there's lots of people on this call. But there's lots of sensors out there that aren't reset certified, that don't have the parameters that you need to be within tolerance of. And something like Aura, is a good sensor. It's reset certified. It will give you the detail you need, and it has an index itself. So it's hugely important, and it's only going to become more and more important based on the ESG side of things, because if you can understand your air quality, you can understand your temperature and humidity, and your CO2, you can understand how well your BMS is running or how efficient your building is as well. So there are energy savings to be made from monitoring indoor air quality. It's not just about the health of the people in the building.
And Michael, do you think sort of going forward, that people will want to see that data sort of displayed or available in a building?
We get asked for it every day. Yeah. So we've got a very large pharmaceutical company who are doing a project in India, and they will have 21 screens around their office displaying indoor air quality data, just indoor air quality data. So people can see what the indoor air quality is like. It's in Bangalore in India. So the air quality outside is very poor. And they want to show everyone, scientists, the people that they have in that building, that the indoor air quality is really good. So it's already happening. We're already being asked for it. And I'm sure, Dustin is, especially in APAC, APAC is where it's really starting to ramp up, and people want to see the air quality. Francesca mentioned earlier, you can go and buy your own indoor air quality sensor. It may not be as good as a IEQ, but people can come in and say, look, this is really bad. And you then have to, as a business owner or a building owner or a manager, you have to then prove them wrong rather than prove them right. So yeah, it's happening now.
Yeah, I think there's a massive piece with the being transparent with data around handing control back to a building occupant. So With most of us, we choose what we eat and what we drink. So we drink nice filtered water. It's not full of dirt or anything. Exactly. Very nice. Thank you, Michael. And we choose to eat healthy food as much as we can, but we can't really choose what we breathe, particularly when we go into office environments. We hand control over to the building owner, to our employers. It is massively important, particularly in the current climate, to have building occupants feel like they're more in control, because we're so out of control with everything that's going on with COVID. It's one of those things where if you can hand back control, I think because that transparency is there, people will go with a known versus an unknown. So if you've got, I don't know, 2 buildings, exactly the same price point, exactly the same amenities, access to public transport, but one of them is able to deliver a known entity when it comes to indoor air quality, I think that's a massively compelling advantage.
Paul, if I can bring you in at this point. To what extent, I mean, often people, sort of monitoring indoor air quality is almost seen as a relatively new or sort of shiny sort of thing. Does it need to be sort of regarded as as the norm rather than the exception?
I mean, people have been talking about smart, connected, intelligent, human-centric buildings for years and years. I mean, throughout my 25 career, we've been talking about smart buildings, but for some reason, the last 12 months has accentuated this, and it is going to drive this convergent disruption that's been happening across the industry more than ever. So you've got the telecom space, you've got the IT space, you've got the property space, you've got the pop tech space, you've got all these industries coming together. You've got millennials that are just changing the whole way that people work, live and play. You've got smartphones now that people are working from. You've got this data-rich environment. The world, we've seen this thing happening for years and years and years, but for now, we're at the tip of the arrow. When it comes to smart buildings, I mean, it's not difficult to turn a building from a fairly analog environment to a digital environment. Through the use of fairly standard technology, you can monitor the environment at a very low cost. The problem you've got in this industry is globally, there's a lot of agendas at play. And actually, for once, the human and the human-centric design of the built environment now is driving this whole agenda. And people are voting with their feet. So you've got empty buildings and enterprises sat there really worried about how do we get people back into the workplace? And there are very simple things that they can do. Touchless environments. So the minute you walk into the building, you don't actually have to touch any surface. Air quality is categorically the #1 thing that people are talking about left, right, and center. And people think it's expensive. It's not. It's a very quick and easy system to deploy. The challenge as I see it is all of a sudden everyone's an IoT expert and everyone's an air quality expert. And the challenge is this isn't a simple solution. You need to understand quite a complex environment because there's a lot of agendas. So you've got HR, you've got technology, you've got telecoms, you've got facilities management, you've got buildings management, FM. To bring this solution together, it is a truly consultative approach, and air quality sits at the core, but it ties into HVAC and BMS. And all of a sudden, I think HVAC and BMS players are going to come into this space as well and talk about air quality and IoT. So it's a massively disruptive phase that we're going through. But it's the likes of platforms like Metrikus where I see the real value is it's bringing all that data and actually presenting information in the right format at the right time to the right person, whether that be on a display in the reception or whether it be on a smartphone to the individual. And how does the individual use the building? So air quality, it's got to tie in with light, the fact that people, they don't have desks where they go and work now. Some people like it to be cool, where their brain can operate at maximum capacity and they can churn out really good pieces of work. So like deep thinking, they want to have a cool environment and maybe like a low light, or they might want a collaboration space. So in a meeting room, they want bright light, high oxygen to keep them alert, keep them alive, keep them awake. So this whole space is a very complex subject. And I think Francesca covered quite a few. It's a science, right? A lot of this is a science. And it's trying to bring in lots of variables, which is where the magic of platforms, so air quality would feed into this quite complex web. I've covered a lot there. A bit of time.
How do you see the sort of world of air quality monitoring then developing in the next 10 years? Is it going to become more data driven?
Well, regulation's got to drive this. There's a lot, regulation standards has got to drive this. The problem you've got within the built environment is build to sell. Right? It's a classic example where you've got people trying to build buildings at a profit, they're developers. You need to build to operate, because the building, all the value is in the 25 to 30 year life cycle. Once the building's built or it's been refurbished, the energy efficiency, the health, and all the services and how that delivers value to every stakeholder across the ecosystem is what's driving this. So air quality, it sits at the core. I mean, it's the most basic thing. It's providing a service to the occupants, okay, which for some reason it's the occupants that, if you look at the enterprise, the biggest value is the productivity gain, as I see it, because if you can optimize the way that people deliver service to the enterprise, air quality is the most basic thing affecting cognitive performance. And there's been numerous studies that highlight that, but most buildings, people just don't understand how unhealthy they are. And even I say that I'm in a little office at the end of my garden, all the windows are shut. I've got no idea how high the CO2 levels are. I bet they're probably a lot higher than they should be. So I can feel myself sometimes late on the day feeling quite tired and drowsy. And these sensors aren't that expensive to put in. So I think these sensors need to be put everywhere. And as I say, the work anywhere agenda, people will vote with their feet. When you go to a building to work, it's not necessarily in the enterprise, it's railway stations, on trains, in cafes, at home. And people will choose to go and work where they are in a safe, healthy, connected environment to allow them to perform at their best.
Yeah, I think in the next couple of years, particularly when it comes to sensor technology, like there are, as Michael said, there's a lot of crap, but all of that's going to start to get filtered out, but there needs to be stricter governance of the types of sensors that are good. And they don't need to be super high grade industrial types that the academics use. It just needs to be a very good indicator. So I think that is going to be massively important, is stricter governance over sensor manufacturers. But also in terms of the sampling, so the placement of sensors in a space. I think I saw this pop up in the chat, and it's something that we've been working on at the moment, is working with researchers in this field of where should we put sensors in a space? Because I think that's also been overlooked. And there are places where you can put sensors where you will get biased results. So particularly if you're doing a survey, the strategic sampling locations need to be well thought out and need to be done by an independent body. It can't just be you plugging sensors in next to an open window or right on top of a plant or anything like that. So sampling is going to be a massive thing as well, but also just creating a much denser network of sensors, because Paul, like you said, they're more cost effective than ever to implement. There is no reason why we should just put one on each 10,000 square foot floor plate. There is variation of temperature, even from floor to ceiling. So just creating that dense network of sensors, gathering lots of data, having those independent bodies who are assessing the data that comes from these networks as well, so that we really make the most out of the data we're getting, rather than a lot of people monitoring indoor air quality, kind of visualizing it, but not really going any further. It's almost like it needs to be fed back to universities who are data poor. We're getting increasingly data rich as a commercial office environment. It needs to be fed back. There needs to be this feedback loop that's implemented, I think, and that'll be important as well.
You mentioned, actually, I'll bring in one of the questions that we've had from Nathan Wood, who's asked, how do we ensure that sort of air quality monitors are positioned in the right place? And is it important that they are moved around periodically? I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on that one.
It's a really good question. I think that's the one that I saw out of the corner of my eye. It's one of those things that's not particularly well researched at the moment. So University of Lancaster are definitely doing stuff on this at the moment, because pollutants move in different ways. Like they're all different weights and they move differently in a space. So I think that moving sensors around a building is good unless you want to standardize your approach, which is why I almost think that a denser sensor network is a better way to do things. But if for whatever reason you have budgetary constraints, moving it around is a good intermediate step. So there's vague guidance. So like the well standard fit well at us at AirRated, we provide guidance in terms of the fact that sensors should be placed at human level, because we're looking at how the indoor air quality impacts people. I think I can hear Kavita agreeing with me here. There is literally no point putting it in cooling. And I tried. Yeah, what were you going to say, Kavita?
Yeah, I think installing the sensors in an occupied space, or where it's generally more occupied than transient spaces, are a good idea. I can tell a story there where I once gave a tenancy, an employer, their free reign to install their own sensors, and they put one in the kitchen in between two microwaves, and they rang me up and they sort of was saying the range is off scale, something happening in the kitchen, and I went down there and I found it between two microwaves. So that was the heat and the smells from the food problem.
Yeah,
I think what people don't really understand how dynamic indoor air quality, how dynamic the airflow is in a properly ventilated space. But it's also true that if the internal fixtures and fittings are moved around or changed, or partitions put in, between work areas, and put screens put in, and maybe there's some foliage put in on a large dividing panel or something like that. All those things will actually affect the flow of air, and it can actually result in some dead areas where the airflow is not good, and there tends to be an accumulation of pollutants which created in the immediate vicinity. So again, it's as everybody's been saying, it's actually trying to understand what is happening within the space, whether it's just a simple work area on one floor or whether it's the whole building. Anything changes, then the likelihood is that the air quality is also going to change, and therefore the need for continual monitoring, so that the effect of changes can be seen, and if there are problems, then intervention can be made. I'd just like to ask Dustin, if I may, can we just have a quick word about the calibration of the sensors, because Francesca was talking a little earlier about having the standards improved across the industry for the sensors themselves, but Reset to a certain extent is already doing that, because it has a set of standards which the Reset accredited monitors have to comply with. So how do you see with the UHU Aura, how do you see the continual calibration of the sensors there?
So the way we do calibration, we do it in multiple steps. The first one would be inside the factory during manufacture. So the sensors would be calibrated at the production site. And once we ship and it starts to operate inside the client's space, we also use software to calibrate it regularly. We do have periodic calibration technology that we've developed so that the sensors any drift on the sensors can be addressed. And since we understand that well or reset would require the sensor to be changed as part of its annual calibration requirement, Aura is designed with modules so that you don't need to change the entire device. You can just remove the sensor from the device and you can just slot in a new one. Yeah, so these are the ways to calibrate the product.
Okay. We've had a question, actually, somebody's asked also about the long-term impact of using sensors. Basically, do air quality sensors require maintenance or cleaning? And if so, how? Don't know if anybody wants to jump in on that one.
Dustin, that's your bag.
Yep. Well, I guess it depends on where you deploy it. It depends on the kind of environment that the sensor is exposed to. If it's exposed to a more polluted environment, then it might need more maintenance. But if it's like a standard office space, cleaning is, yeah, minimal. And with the way we designed Aura, we also added a type of mesh so that it can filter out certain things from damaging or entering the sensors. And that's part of the patent when we designed the Aura.
So this is basically a this mesh that you're talking about. It's almost like a sort of pre-filter, taking out maybe some of the very large particulates or something of that nature.
That's correct.
I mean the fact that we have the facility to monitor with UHoo Aura PM1, PM 2.5, PM4, and PM10. Why would we need to have the PM4 when in the UK here we focus primarily on PM10, PM 2.5, and PM1? Why would we need PM4?
PM4 is a good way to estimate mold because the size of mold spores are approximately 0.3 to 0.45 microns. So if we are able to measure PM4, then we can approximate or give an indication on the risk of mold. Not necessarily measure mold, but give a better indication on it.
Can you just explain to our audience the certification of the particulates monitor sensors?
Yes, so the particulate monitor sensor that we use, it's MCERT certified. So I believe MCERT is a UK standard. So yeah.
Anybody else wanting to chip in at all on that?
I'm not an expert in that field.
Right.
I know MCERT's being applied to outdoor air quality sensing solutions. Have no first-hand experience of them being applied to.
I don't either.
Jamie, any more questions from our audience, please?
Let me just go through. Actually, while I quickly scan through, so one point that we were sort of talking about sort of earlier is obviously an awful lot of us are also working at home at this point. As people sort of become sort of more aware of indoor air quality in the office, do you think they're going to sort of take that home and also sort of want to see air quality improved in their own homes as well?
Definitely. And I think there is a bit more, because again, you have the control aspect, you have more control at home, so you can actually do things to improve your environment. I think, and this is another common misconception, I think people believe it's quite difficult because usually our homes are naturally ventilated spaces. So difficult maybe to enhance ventilation in our homes if we don't want to open the window in wintertime. But you can increase ventilation in other ways. So some buildings have trickle ventilation. And this is the sort of thing that is really good design in buildings, but that is not communicated to a user in terms of actually enforcing it in operation. So you live inside, I mean, I live in a flat at the moment and it has trickle ventilation. I know what trickle ventilation is, but not everyone does. So, and not everyone knows the appropriate time to open trickle ventilation. So it's best to open it at night when outdoor levels of air pollution are low. It's really great for regulating temperature and humidity, so particularly good in wintertime. It's things like that, and also PIV. I mean, if Nathan Wood is on this call, he absolutely loved this subject. So PIV, you can get systems kind of towards the 800, 1,000 pound mark that go in your attic. So positive input ventilation. It's just another really interesting technique that can be applied to the home that perhaps people aren't that familiar with unless they do a lot of digging. So, and like Kavita said, implementing plants in your space is another neat trick. Reducing the amount of potent chemicals that you use. With candles, if you use beeswax candles or soy candles, they're better than kind of more synthetic ones. And if you're, I mean, the first tip for reducing something like TVOCs in the space is to just eliminate the source. So for example, if you're refurbing your home, if you're refurnishing it, buying secondhand goods is a really nice place to start. It doesn't promote this waste culture that we've got at the moment. And also it doesn't compromise your indoor air quality if you go for secondhand goods. So lots of neat tricks that I think haven't really been communicated to people in order for them to implement them in their day-to-day lives and at home. But I think it will be particularly important because people have a heightened awareness for indoor air quality, regardless of where they are indoors, whether it's hotels, whether it's planes even, or whether it's the office or the home.
Okay. Now we're almost sort of running out of time at this point. But what I wanted to do just to sort of wrap up was really to sort of ask sort of all the panelists for like their sort of key sort of takeaways or key thoughts from this session. I know we've covered an awful lot of ground, unfortunately. I was wondering actually if I could start with Dustin, actually sort of summing up. So looking forward, so why is it important for offices and organisations, big and small, to look at air quality and to introduce sort of measures to improve it?
Yeah, it's getting to be really important to monitor air quality because people are already understanding its effects on productivity of people. And much more importantly, companies are also trying to bring people back to the workplace. And given that the coronavirus can be airborne, there's also that fear that people might not want to go back. So companies need to be able to create that peace of mind as well, that if you come back to the office, the air quality is being managed, you're not going to get infected that easily. So this is very important. And we see this as something that would just eventually grow because it's not just about the coronavirus, it would also be something that would affect other types of viruses. When we look at people getting sick inside offices, it's also about air quality. We need to manage that because it's really all about health and well-being. Yeah.
Well, what about you, Michael? I mean, you know, we now talk a lot about smart buildings and some new systems being in place. So do you see air quality as one of those sort of key sort of functions that all smart buildings in the future will have as a matter of course?
Yeah, it is, and it's only going to grow, as I said before. We're actually working at the moment with a company in Wales. There's a standard coming out. It's going to be the new standard for health and well-being in non-domestic buildings. It's currently what's called a PAS, and it's called PAS 3003, and it's likely to become a standard this year. So it's becoming ever more important. More customers are asking about it. Someone mentioned in one of the questions or the chat earlier, is there a standard? That there are different standards, but you know, there's CIBSE, there, you know, it depends on where you are. And Kavita and Francesca covered this off, but there isn't one about indoor air quality and health and well-being, but there will be one out. If this PAS gets approved and it becomes a standard, then there will be one, and then it will need to be enforced. Something that probably a lot of people aren't aware of is at the moment, there are a lot of people suing their employers for bad air quality, and they're getting paid, it's none of it's going to court, but people are winning, you know, between £2,500 and £5,000 from their employers for bad air quality. That's just going to keep going up and up and up. Pretty soon there'll be a no win, no fee indoor air quality line, I'm sure, on the TV or on the radio that you can call up and, you know, try and take a shot at your employer or your landlord or whoever it might be. But this standard's coming out to try and help with that, and for people to start to work within the parameters of good air quality. Kavita and Francesca are experts, and Dustin is, you know, having built a product around it. But it is becoming more and more important. And as I said earlier, COVID has accelerated indoor air quality up the agenda. Everyone's become an expert. You know, Dyson sold more of their air purifiers that push a lot of air around. I'm not sure how much they purify though, but they push a lot of air around, and people are buying them. They're flying off the shelves. So it's not going away. As I said earlier, it's becoming more and more important.
And Paul, sort of, what about sort of data? Are we about to see a sort of avalanche of air quality data coming in?
You can only have the data if you can actually capture the data. So I think my my view, and to summarize this is the session today, it's all about education. I mean, my role within the community is just, people don't know what they don't know. And it's about educating both the property community and the technology community and the enterprise around the importance of air quality as part of this big agenda. Corporate social responsibility, CSR, is a new role that's been born within a lot of multinationals. It's going to hit their agenda soon. And I'll just end by saying, people think this stuff's expensive. The ROI is categorically the strongest ROI of any technology that I've ever delivered in my career. You put this stuff in, you can quantify that your employees will be far more productive. They are your most expensive resource. They always get left behind and they're not thought about. Whereas air quality, if you get the air quality right and optimum for the environment, the ROI is categorically really powerful and really strong. So you need to go and work with an advisor or someone independent in the market to go and understand where you are today, where you want to get to, and then put in measures to get from A to B. And I think that's happening now. I mean, I'm getting inquiries daily on people looking at this.
Thanks for that. So Kavita, sort of summing up as well, you know, how important will air quality be in the offices of the future? You know, how will these systems be embedded?
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to become really important. From a personal point of view, I would like to go back to a space which I feel comfortable, and I'm sure that it's going to be clean and safe. I have a lot of clients I work with who've come to me and talked about pandemic proofing, but that's from an indoor air quality point of view. But in terms of what we can control and do within our spaces. But I'm also in contact with local authorities, especially London local authorities, and I was refreshing to know that Paul mentioned about PAS 303 in Wales. And also City of London. They are looking seriously about mandating some level of indoor air quality standards or criteria or targets to be included as part of, you know, when you move into a building, brand new building or refurbished space, the same way they have mandated BREEAM to achieve a very good, excellent, and this will play a key part as well.
The mayor just announced yesterday a funding package for bringing Londoners back, and it's all about indoor air quality. It came out actually not. No, it came out today, 23rd. It came out this morning, actually, off the press. Yeah.
Can you just remind us, Michael, about that PAS code? It was the reference is PAS 3003, did you say?
Yeah.
PAS 3003, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
The new standard for well-being and indoor air quality in non-domestic buildings. We're working on it at the moment.
Okay.
And last, Francesca, sort of just to get you to sort of wrap up as well. I mean, how is it important is it to sort of look at the sort of the health benefits for all this? What will it actually mean for people sort of working in these offices when they know that their air quality is being monitored and sort of being studied?
A great deal. And I think it's a bit like plants, where you've got biophilia and there is the psychological aspect. I think the transparency of data and knowing that duty of care is actually being implemented by your employer or by the building owner is going to be a massive part of it. You'll feel healthier if you see green ticks everywhere for PM 2.5 and CO2 and all that sort of stuff. So there's a big mental play when it comes to this. And also that really cringeworthy phrase of controlling the controllables. Like productivity, for example, there are a number of variables. You might be struggling in your personal life, you might have problems at work. Indoor air quality is that one thing that if you can be equipped to be as productive as possible from an air quality point of view, then you stand the best chance of being as productive as you can be. And I think when it comes to implementing clean air technologies to improve health in the indoor environment, monitoring is a huge part of that, because you want, if you're going to, as a building owner or an employer, invest in clean air technology, you want to be able to see the difference it's making. So much like as a building occupant, you'll have transparency and be able to see data on a screen. as someone who is investing in this sort of technology or these sorts of products, you want to be able to see the ROI very clearly from data. So like I said at the end of my presentation, making data-driven decisions, but also getting the validation from data itself that the decisions you're making are good. And it's getting the proof in the pudding. I think if you're going to shell out a whole load of cash on carbon filters or bipolar ionization or PIV, then you want to be able to see the delivery of clean, healthy environments.
That's brilliant. No, absolutely. Well, thanks very much. We've covered an awful lot of ground, and I'd like to thank everybody for taking part in this panel and all the viewpoints. I'm going to hand back to Graham now, but thank you very much for everyone taking part. I hope you've all enjoyed it. As I said, my name's Jamie Hailstone. I'm the group editor for airqualitynews.com. Do give us a wave and a visit next time you're on the internet. But thanks very much. And now I will hand back to Graham.
Okay, folks. Well, look, thank you very much for attending this launch webinar. I hope we've covered the ground that you were hoping we would cover. We have got a lot of questions which have been fed through to us, and we will endeavor to get the answers for you and get them sent back to you on your email address. We'll make a compendium of the questions and the answers for them. I'd like very much to thank everybody on the panel here for giving their views. They are real experts in their field. I think one of the joys has been listening to the information which Francesca has imparted in this session. Thank you very much. And I do like to think that if you want to have any further information about these products, do come back to me. My name is, again, Graham Mills from Airprofiling Ltd. And I'm going to just pop something on the screen here. Whoops, here we go. Where's that? There we go. That's my contact numbers. And please do get in touch. We'll provide you with all the information you need. We have lots and lots of files on the UHoo Aura. It really is the Super-uHoo, and it is going to help an awful lot of people on the air quality issues in the commercial sector. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.